In this video, we are going to talk about questions about amendments about voting, when women got the right to vote, and also the history of the 1900s. Amendments to the Constitution. An amendment is a change to the Constitution. It is an addition to the Constitution. The Constitution has 27 amendments. The first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights gives rights and freedoms to all people in the United States. The First Amendment gives Americans many important rights and freedoms. It guarantees freedom of speech. Americans can say what they want to. It guarantees freedom of the press. Americans can write what they want to. It guarantees freedom of religion. Americans can worship as they want to. They can practice any religion or not practice a religion. It guarantees freedom of assembly. Americans can meet together as they want to. It guarantees the right to petition the government. Americans can ask the government to do something or not to do something by giving the government a signed document called a petition. Other amendments to the Constitution are very important. Soon after the Civil War, there were 3 amendments. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment made all Blacks citizens of the United States. The 15th Amendment gave Blacks the right to vote. In 1913, the 16th Amendment established income taxes. In 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. In 1964, the 24th Amendment ended the poll tax that citizens in some states had to pay to vote in a national election. In 1971, the 26th Amendment gave citizens 18 years and older the right to vote. Citizens have to be 18 and older to vote for president. Susan B. Anthony was a civil rights leader. She fought for women's rights. In 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton began an organization that fought for women's suffrage, the right to vote. These are the questions that you might have to answer during your interview about what we just went over. The question 14, there are 4 amendments to the Constitution about who can vote. Describe one of them. You only need to give one of these answers. You could say citizens 18 and older can vote. You don't have to pay a poll tax to vote. Any citizen can vote. Women and men can vote. A male citizen of any race can vote. Question 54. How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? 18 and older. Question 77. What did Susan B. Anthony do? Fought for women's rights, fought for civil rights. Now we're going to talk about the history of the 1900s, especially the wars of the 1900s. World War I. World War I began in 1914. The United Kingdom, France, and Russia fought Germany and Austria-Hungary. The United States entered World War I in 1917 and helped the United Kingdom, France, and Russia win the war. Woodrow Wilson was the president during World War I. The war ended in 1918. The United States became a great world power. The Great Depression. This is not a war, but is something that is going to come up in your interview because it's part of the American history of the 1900s. The Depression. From 1929 to 1939, there was a Great Depression. The American economy collapsed. The Depression had many causes. Factories and farms produced too much. After World War I, countries in Europe didn't have money to buy American goods. Many people borrowed too much money. It was a very difficult time in the United States. Factories closed, workers lost their jobs, or their salaries were cut, many banks closed, and many people lost all their money in the stock market. Now we're going to talk about the president who helped the United States recover from the Great Depression. And it's also important to know about Franklin Delano Roosevelt because he was also the president during World War II. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president of the United States from 1933 to 1945. He became the president during the Great Depression. His plan to help the country was called the New Deal. The government made jobs for people who had no work. They built roads, parks, bridges, and buildings. The government gave people loans to help them keep their farms or homes. The Social Security system began. Roosevelt was the president during World War II. He served longer than any other president. He died during his fourth term in office in 1945. Now we're going to talk about the second war the United States was involved during the 1900s. World War II began in 1939. The United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, and other countries were called the Allied Nations. They fought Japan, Germany, and Italy. The United States entered World War II in 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. In 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The United States and the Allied nations won the war in 1945. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the leader of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II. Later, he became the President of the United States. After World War II, many countries formed a new international organization called the United Nations. It is also called the UN. At the United Nations, countries discuss world problems and try to keep peace. The UN also helped many countries. It gives them economic aid and provides education programs, health programs, and other assistance. Let's talk about the other wars the United States was involved during the 1900s. The Cold War, which is a different type of war, meaning there was no fire, but the Korean War and the Vietnam War were definitely wars where there was some type of armament and soldiers involved. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union became major world powers. The two countries had very different political systems. The American system is democratic, and the Soviet system was communist. The United States and the Soviet Union did not fight each other directly in a war, but they competed with each other politically and economically. This was called the Cold War. During the Cold War, the main concern of the United States was communism. The United States fought communist forces in 2 wars. From 1950 to 1953, the United States fought the Korean War. From 1964 to 1973, the United States fought in the Vietnam War. The Cold War ended during the years 1990 and 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up into independent states. And the final war of the 1900s is the Persian Gulf War. The Persian Gulf War began in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. The United States entered the war in 1991. The military forces of the United States, the United Kingdom, and 32 other nations were called the coalition forces. The war ended quickly in 1991 when the Iraqi forces left Kuwait. George H.W. Bush was the president during the Persian Gulf War. The United States, the Persian Gulf War, was also called Operation Desert Storm. Here are the 5 wars the United States fought during the 1900s: World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Persian Gulf War. Now, let's talk about questions that are related to what we just learned. Who did the United States fight in World War II? Japan, Germany, and Italy. Before he was president, Eisenhower was a general. What world was he in? World War II. During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? Communism. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. You only need to mention one. You can say World War I, you can say World War II, you can say the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Persian Gulf War. Who was president during World War I? Woodrow Wilson. Who was president during the Great Depression and World War II? Franklin Roosevelt. Since we are talking about the history of the 1900s, we should definitely talk about, since you are going to be asked in your interview, about the civil rights movement. During the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement worked to end racial discrimination against Blacks in the United States. It worked for equal rights for all Americans. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was the most famous leader of the civil rights movement. He fought for civil rights. He worked for equality for all Americans. He led protests against discrimination in many states. In 1963, he led hundreds of thousands of people in a demonstration to support new civil rights laws. It was called the March on Washington. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed. The civil rights movement and the nation lost a great leader. The United States remembers Martin Luther King Jr. in a national holiday on the third Monday in January every year. Another important event to remember and to know for your interview is the attack to the United States on September 11, 2001. On the morning of September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States. They hijacked 4 airplanes from Boston, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. area. They crashed 2 planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Both towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. 1 plane crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military, in Arlington, Virginia. 1 plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Thousands of people died in the buildings and on the airplanes. People from more than 80 different countries died in the attacks. Most of the victims were Americans. The US government asked other nations to join in a fight against terrorism around the world. President George W. Bush ordered air attacks against Afghanistan. Then he sent American troops there to fight against the terrorist organization responsible for the attacks on the United States. Questions related to what we just learned. What movement tried to end racial discrimination? Civil rights movement. What did Martin Luther King Jr. do? He fought for civil rights, worked for equality for all Americans. What major event happened on September 11, 2001 in the United States? Terrorists attacked the United States.